Have you ever wondered why the stories that emerged from ancient Greece still captivate us thousands of years later? Why do we keep retelling tales of gods who throw lightning bolts, heroes who slay monsters, and mortals who dare to challenge the divine order itself? The answer lies not just in their entertainment value, but in something far more profound. These myths represent humanity's first systematic attempt to understand the fundamental forces that govern existence. Love, death, power, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. Greek mythology stands as perhaps the most influential collection of stories ever created, shaping everything from our language to our literature, from our psychology to our understanding of heroism itself. But here's what most people don't realize about these ancient tales. They weren't just random stories told around campfires. They formed a complex, interconnected universe that explained everything from why the seasons change to the very nature of justice. Every god, every hero, and every monster served a specific purpose in this grand narrative tapestry. In this journey, we are going to dive deep into this mythological universe, not just skimming the surface with the popular stories you already know, but exploring the cosmic forces that birthed the gods themselves. We will look at the primordial chaos that existed before time began, and the intricate family dynamics that make modern dramas look like children's bedtime stories. If you want to uncover the deeper meanings behind these legendary tales, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our explorations into the ancient world. But first, a warning. The Greeks didn't sanitize their myths for modern audiences. These stories contain violence, betrayal, and psychological manipulation that would make Machiavelli blush. The gods of Olympus weren't benevolent parental figures. They were cosmic forces of nature given personality, complete with all the petty jealousies and destructive impulses of the natural world itself. Thunder doesn't care if it frightens children, and neither did Zeus. The story begins not with gods or heroes, but with something far more fundamental and terrifying. In the beginning, there was chaos. Not chaos as we understand it today, meaning disorder or confusion, but chaos as a primordial void, an endless, gaping emptiness that existed before space and time themselves had meaning. Imagine trying to conceive of nothingness so complete that even the concept of existence hadn't yet been born. This wasn't darkness, because darkness implies the absence of light, and light hadn't been created. This wasn't silence, because silence implies the absence of sound, and sound had no meaning in this pre-reality void. From this incomprehensible nothingness, the first beings spontaneously emerged through forces that defy rational explanation. Gaia, the earth herself, came into existence not as a goddess who ruled over the earth, but as the physical embodiment of all terrestrial existence. Every mountain, every valley, every grain of soil was literally part of her body. She was followed by Tartarus, the deepest, darkest pit imaginable, a realm so far beneath the earth that it would later serve as the prison for the most dangerous beings in existence. Then came Eros, not the chubby cherub with arrows that popular culture has made him, but the fundamental force of attraction and desire that drives all creation and reproduction throughout the cosmos. These primordial beings operated according to principles that modern minds struggle to comprehend. They didn't think or plan or scheme like the later generations of gods would. They simply existed as fundamental forces of reality, each embodying essential aspects of existence itself. Gaia didn't decide to create life, she was life, in all its creative and destructive potential. Tartarus didn't choose to be a place of punishment, he was the inevitable consequence of existence itself, the dark counterbalance to creation. But Gaia, despite her primordial nature, possessed a creative drive that would shape the entire mythological universe. Through parthenogenesis, reproduction without a mate, she brought forth Uranus, the starry sky, who became both her son and her husband, in the first of many disturbing family relationships that would characterize Greek mythology. Uranus stretched himself across Gaia's entire form, creating the dome of heaven that arched over the earth, and together they began the process of populating the cosmos with increasingly complex beings. Their first children were the Titans, beings of enormous size and power who represented the raw forces of nature before they were refined and civilized by later generations. These weren't the anthropomorphic gods of Olympus with their human-like personalities and motivations. The Titans embodied pure elemental forces. Oceanus was the vast river that the Greeks believed encircled the entire world, while Hyperion was the blazing light that preceded the sun itself. Cronus represented time in its most destructive aspect, the inevitable force that devours everything it creates. But Uranus, despite being Gaia's own creation, developed a deep fear and hatred of his children. The Titans were too powerful, too unpredictable, and their very existence threatened the primordial simplicity of the early cosmos. So Uranus made a decision that would establish the pattern of generational conflict that runs throughout Greek mythology, like a poisonous river. Each night, as he descended to embrace Gaia, he would force their newborn children back into her womb, trapping them within the earth itself and preventing them from taking their place in the cosmic order. This imprisonment caused Gaia tremendous physical and emotional agony. She was simultaneously the loving mother who had given birth to these powerful beings and the prison that held them captive against their will. The psychological complexity of this situation reveals the sophistication of Greek mythological thinking. Gaia wasn't simply a victim of Uranus's tyranny, nor was she merely an angry mother seeking revenge. She represented the earth itself, which must endure both the creative and destructive forces of nature, nurturing life, while also serving as the grave that eventually claims all living things. The injustice of this situation could not continue indefinitely. Gaia, in her dual role as Earth Goddess and Suffering Mother, conceived a plan that would require both cunning and violence to execute successfully. She created a great adamantine sickle, a weapon forged from the hardest substance imaginable, and presented it to her imprisoned children with a terrible proposition. One of them would have to castrate his own father to free his siblings and claim power over the cosmos. Most of the Titans recoiled from this matricidal suggestion, despite their hatred of their father's tyranny. The psychological barrier of harming one's parent proved too strong for most of them to overcome. But Cronus, whose name would become synonymous with time's destructive power, stepped forward to accept both the weapon and the terrible responsibility it represented. He understood that some acts of violence are necessary to prevent greater injustices, even when those acts violate the most fundamental taboos of civilized behavior. The castration of Uranus represents one of the most psychologically complex episodes in all of mythology. When Cronus severed his father's genitals with the adamantine sickle, he wasn't simply committing an act of violence. He was fundamentally altering the structure of reality itself. Uranus's blood fell upon Gaia and gave birth to the Furies, the terrifying goddesses of vengeance, who would forever after pursue those who shed family blood. From the foam created when his severed genitals fell into the sea, Aphrodite would later emerge, connecting love and beauty eternally with violence and castration in the Greek mythological consciousness. This primal act of rebellion established the central theme that would dominate Greek mythology for generations to come. Each generation of divine rulers would fear being overthrown by their own children, leading them to commit increasingly desperate and violent acts to maintain their power. Yet these very acts of prevention would inevitably create the conditions that made their downfall not just possible, but psychologically necessary. The Greeks understood that tyranny, even divine tyranny, contains within itself the seeds of its own destruction. With Uranus castrated and powerless, Cronus assumed rulership over the cosmos and ushered in what would later be remembered as the golden age of humanity. Under his reign, humans lived in perfect harmony with nature, requiring no laws, no agriculture, no technology to sustain themselves. The earth provided everything they needed spontaneously, and death came only as a gentle sleep at the end of a life filled with peace and contentment. This wasn't mere nostalgia for a simpler time, but a sophisticated understanding that technological and social progress comes at the cost of innocence and natural harmony. But Cronus had learned a terrible lesson from his conflict with his father. Power, once gained through violence, must be maintained through constant vigilance against those who would use similar violence to claim it. When he married his sister Rhea and began having children of his own, the ancient prophecy that had driven his rebellion against Uranus returned to haunt him. Gaia and Uranus warned him that one of his own children was destined to overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his father before him. The solution Cronus devised revealed both his intelligence and his fundamental corruption by power. Rather than imprisoning his children as Uranus had done, he would simply swallow them whole immediately after birth, keeping them alive within his own body where they could pose no threat to his authority. This wasn't madness, but calculated tyranny of the most sophisticated kind. He had found a way to prevent the prophesied rebellion, while avoiding the specific mistake that had led to his father's downfall. One by one, as Rhea gave birth to their children, Cronus would take the newborn infant and swallow it entirely. Hestia, the future goddess of the hearth, disappeared into his gullet while still covered in birth blood. Demeter, who would one day control all agricultural fertility, vanished before she could even cry. Hera, destined to become queen of the gods, was consumed before she could open her eyes. Hades, the future ruler of the underworld, and Poseidon, destined to control the seas, both suffered the same fate. Each act of infanticide drove Rhea deeper into grief and rage. Like Gaia before her, she was trapped between her love for her husband and her maternal instinct to protect her children. The psychological torment of watching her newborn infants disappear into Cronus's throat, knowing they remained alive but imprisoned within his body, created a fury that would eventually reshape the entire cosmic order. When she became pregnant for the 6th time, she knew she could not endure another such loss. The story continues from here with deception, hidden births, and the eventual rise of Zeus. But already we can see the sophisticated psychological and philosophical framework that the Greeks embedded within their mythological narratives. These weren't simple stories about powerful beings fighting for control. They were complex meditations on the nature of power, the inevitability of generational conflict, the relationship between civilization and violence, and the psychological forces that drive both creation and destruction. Rhea's plan required both cunning and divine assistance. She traveled to Crete, to a sacred cave on Mount Ida, where she gave birth to Zeus in secret. The moment of his birth was marked by supernatural phenomena that revealed his cosmic significance. The earth itself trembled, the heavens opened with thunder despite the clear sky, and the cave filled with a golden light that seemed to emanate from the infant's skin. The Curettes, divine warriors who served Gaia, surrounded the cave and clashed their shields and spears to drown out the baby's cries, ensuring that Cronus would not discover his location. But giving birth in secret was only half the solution. Rhea still had to return to Cronus and convince him that she had delivered another child for him to devour. Her deception was both simple and brilliant. She wrapped a large stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to her husband as their newborn son. Cronus, so consumed by paranoia and the mechanical routine of infanticide, swallowed the stone without hesitation, never suspecting that his prophesied destroyer was growing stronger with each passing day in a Cretan cave. Zeus was raised by nymphs who fed him on the milk of the goat Amalthea and honey from sacred bees. Even as an infant, his divine nature manifested in remarkable ways. He grew with supernatural speed, gaining the strength and wisdom of years within mere months. The isolation of his upbringing, hidden from the cosmic conflicts that had shaped previous generations, allowed him to develop a perspective that neither his father nor grandfather possessed. He understood power not merely as domination, but as the responsibility to create order from chaos. As Zeus matured, he learned the full truth of his origins and destiny. The knowledge that his father had swallowed his siblings alive filled him with a righteous fury that burned hotter than lightning itself. But unlike the previous generational conflicts, Zeus understood that raw violence alone would not be sufficient to defeat Cronus. The ruler of the Titans had learned from Uranus's mistakes and had consolidated power in ways that made direct confrontation nearly impossible. Zeus's first step toward overthrowing his father required him to rescue his siblings from their living tomb within Cronus's body. This rescue mission demanded both strategy and supernatural assistance. Zeus sought out Metis, the Titaness of wisdom and cunning, whose intelligence surpassed even that of the other primordial beings. Together, they concocted a plan that exploited Cronus's greatest weakness, his absolute confidence in his own security. Disguising himself as a simple cupbearer, Zeus approached his father and offered him a drink that Metis had prepared. The potion contained powerful emetics that would force Cronus to vomit up everything he had swallowed. The irony was exquisite. Cronus, who had gained power by swallowing his father's genitals, would lose power by being forced to disgorge his own children. The ruler, who had tried to prevent the cycle of generational conflict by consuming his offspring, would find that nothing can remain hidden within the body forever. When Cronus drank the potion, the effects were immediate and catastrophic. He began vomiting uncontrollably, and one by one, Zeus's siblings emerged fully grown and furious from their father's throat. First came the stone that Rhea had substituted for Zeus, then Poseidon, then Hades, then Hera, then Demeter, and finally Hestia. Each sibling emerged not as the helpless infant they had been when swallowed, but as a fully mature god with powers that had been developing and intensifying during their imprisonment. The psychological impact of this reunion cannot be overstated. These gods had spent their entire conscious existence trapped within their father's body, aware of each other but unable to communicate, unable to act, unable to experience the world beyond the confines of Cronus's stomach. Their rage was not merely personal, but cosmic in scope. They had been denied their rightful place in the universal order, prevented from fulfilling their essential functions as divine forces of nature. But their emergence also marked the beginning of the most devastating war the cosmos had ever witnessed. Cronus still commanded the loyalty of most of the Titans, beings whose power dwarfed even that of the newly freed gods. The Titans controlled the fundamental forces of the universe, from the movement of celestial bodies to the flow of time itself. They had ruled unchallenged for eons and saw the uprising of Zeus and his siblings as nothing more than a temporary rebellion that could be crushed through superior force. The war that followed would be known as the Titanomachy, a conflict so violent and comprehensive that it threatened to tear apart the very fabric of reality. This wasn't merely a battle between two generations of gods, but a fundamental struggle over the nature of cosmic order itself. The Titans represented the old way, where power was absolute and unchanging, where the rulers governed through fear and dominance. Zeus and his siblings represented something entirely new, the possibility of a more complex and nuanced form of divine government. The battleground encompassed the entire cosmos. Mountains were hurled like stones, seas boiled away to nothing, and the sky itself cracked under the strain of divine warfare. The Titans fought with the raw power of elemental forces, calling down earthquakes, hurricanes, and cosmic catastrophes that would have annihilated any mortal civilization. Atlas, the strongest of the Titans, wielded mountains as weapons, while Hyperion's blazing light threatened to incinerate everything it touched. Zeus and his siblings, despite their fury and determination, found themselves outmatched by the sheer scope of Titan power. The war raged for 10 years without either side gaining a decisive advantage. Entire landscapes were transformed by the conflict. New mountain ranges rose where gods had fallen, and deep valleys marked the places where divine blood had flowed. The earth itself groaned under the weight of this cosmic struggle, but Zeus possessed something his father and grandfather had lacked: the wisdom to seek allies rather than ruling through intimidation alone. He understood that victory would require more than just superior force. It would require the support of beings who had been marginalized or oppressed under Titan rule. His greatest strategic insight was to descend into Tartarus, that primordial pit of darkness, and negotiate with the most feared beings in existence. In the depths of Tartarus, Zeus found the Cyclopes and the Hundred-Handed Ones, the monstrous children of Gaia and Uranus, who had been imprisoned there since the earliest days of creation. These beings possessed powers that even the Titans feared. The Cyclopes were master craftsmen who could forge weapons from the fundamental forces of nature itself, while the Hundred-Handed Ones possessed strength that multiplied exponentially with their rage. The negotiations were delicate and dangerous. These imprisoned beings had no reason to trust Zeus, who was, after all, descended from the same line that had condemned them to eternal torment. But Zeus offered them something no previous ruler had ever provided: not just freedom, but a place of honor in the new cosmic order he intended to create. He promised the Cyclopes recognition as the greatest craftsmen in existence, while the Hundred-Handed Ones would serve as guardians of cosmic justice rather than merely prisoners of divine fear. The alliance transformed the war entirely. The Cyclopes forged weapons of unprecedented power for Zeus and his siblings. For Zeus himself, they created the thunderbolt, a weapon that could channel the raw energy of storms and cosmic forces. For Poseidon, they crafted the trident, capable of controlling all bodies of water and causing earthquakes. For Hades, they forged a helmet of invisibility that would allow him to move unseen through any realm. These weapons weren't merely tools of war, but extensions of each god's essential nature and divine function. When Zeus wielded the thunderbolt, he wasn't simply throwing a weapon. He was becoming the living embodiment of the storm itself. The thunder that accompanied his attacks wasn't sound, but the voice of cosmic authority speaking judgment upon those who opposed the new order. The Hundred-Handed Ones brought a different kind of advantage to the conflict. Their ability to hurl hundreds of massive boulders simultaneously turned them into siege engines of unimaginable destructive capability. More importantly, their loyalty to Zeus demonstrated that the new generation of gods could inspire genuine allegiance rather than ruling through fear alone. The tide of war shifted decisively when Zeus demonstrated the full power of his thunderbolt against Mount Othrys, the Titan's stronghold. The mountain, which had stood since the creation of the earth itself, was split in half by a single bolt of divine lightning. The psychological impact on the Titans was devastating. They had believed themselves invulnerable, protected by their ancient power and cosmic authority. The destruction of their fortress revealed that the old order could indeed be challenged and defeated. But the war's conclusion brought new complications that Zeus hadn't anticipated. Victory over the Titans didn't automatically create the stable cosmic order he had envisioned. The defeated Titans had to be dealt with in ways that would prevent future rebellion while acknowledging their continued importance to the functioning of the universe. Some, like Atlas, were given eternal punishments that served cosmic functions, holding up the heavens to prevent the sky from falling back into primordial chaos. Others were offered limited pardons in exchange for accepting subordinate roles in the new divine hierarchy. The complexity of these post-war arrangements revealed Zeus's growing understanding that effective rulership required more than just military victory. It demanded the creation of systems that could maintain order without constant violence. The establishment of this new cosmic order required Zeus to make decisions that would fundamentally reshape the nature of divine power itself. Unlike his predecessors who had ruled through absolute dominance, Zeus recognized that sustainable authority demanded the distribution of responsibility among capable allies. The division of the cosmos among the three brothers became the foundation of what would evolve into the most complex divine government ever conceived. The allocation of realms reflected both practical necessity and psychological insight. Zeus claimed the heavens not merely because they were the most prestigious domain, but because his mastery of storms and lightning made him the natural ruler of atmospheric phenomena. Poseidon's dominion over the seas acknowledged his affinity for the fluid, changeable nature of water, while his volatile temperament made him perfectly suited to govern the unpredictable oceanic realm. Hades received the underworld, a domain that others viewed as punishment, but which he embraced as the ultimate expression of justice and inevitability. This tripartite division created a system of checks and balances that prevented any single deity from accumulating the kind of absolute power that had corrupted previous generations. Each brother possessed authority within his own sphere, while respecting the autonomy of his siblings' domains. The earth itself remained neutral territory, where all three could exercise influence, but none could claim exclusive control. But Zeus's most revolutionary decision involved the integration of female deities into positions of genuine authority. Previous cosmic orders had marginalized feminine divine power, treating goddesses as either obstacles to overcome or prizes to be won. Zeus understood that the forces represented by these deities were too fundamental to cosmic functioning to be suppressed or ignored. His marriages and alliances with various goddesses weren't merely personal relationships, but political arrangements that incorporated essential aspects of reality into his governing coalition. His first wife, Metis, embodied wisdom and strategic thinking. Their union represented Zeus's acknowledgement that intelligence must guide power if rulership is to be effective rather than merely destructive. However, when Metis became pregnant, Zeus faced the same prophetic warning that had driven his father to infanticide. Their child was destined to overthrow him, continuing the cycle of generational conflict that had defined cosmic history. Zeus's solution revealed both his cunning and his willingness to learn from previous mistakes. Rather than killing Metis or their unborn child, he swallowed his pregnant wife whole, incorporating her wisdom directly into his own consciousness. This wasn't the crude cannibalism that had characterized Cronus's approach to the threat of succession. Zeus was absorbing the very essence of strategic thinking, making wisdom a permanent part of his divine nature, rather than an external ally who might eventually become an enemy. The child born from this unusual arrangement would become Athena, who emerged fully grown and armored from Zeus's head. Her birth represented something unprecedented in the mythological tradition, a deity who combined the authority of Zeus with the wisdom of Metis while posing no threat to the established order. Athena became the embodiment of civilized warfare and strategic thinking, demonstrating that conflict could be conducted through intelligence rather than mere violence. Zeus's subsequent marriages continued this pattern of incorporating essential cosmic forces into his governmental structure. His union with Themis, the tightness of divine law and proper custom, established the foundation of justice that would govern both gods and mortals. Their daughters, the Fates, became the ultimate arbiters of destiny, demonstrating that even Zeus acknowledged limits to his own power. No deity, regardless of strength or authority, could alter the fundamental patterns that the Fates wove into the fabric of existence. The marriage to Hera proved more complex and psychologically fraught than these earlier alliances. Hera represented the principle of legitimate marriage and the protection of women in their roles as wives and mothers. Her union with Zeus was intended to provide stability and legitimacy to his rule, while acknowledging the importance of family structure in both divine and mortal society. However, the relationship quickly deteriorated into a cycle of infidelity, jealousy, and revenge that would characterize their interactions throughout mythological history. Zeus's numerous extramarital affairs weren't merely expressions of divine lust, but manifestations of his need to form alliances with various aspects of natural and human experience. Each liaison represented his attempt to incorporate new forces into his cosmic government, whether through seduction, rape, or transformation. These affairs created a fundamental contradiction at the heart of Olympian society. Zeus preached the importance of marriage and family structure while consistently violating these principles in his own behavior. Hera's jealousy and vengeful persecution of Zeus's lovers and illegitimate children reflected not just personal betrayal, but the cosmic tension between order and chaos, between the stability that marriage represents and the creative disorder that drives innovation and change. The children born from Zeus's various affairs became some of the most important deities in the Greek pantheon, each representing aspects of human experience that required divine oversight. Apollo and Artemis, born to the Titaness Leto, embodied the civilizing forces of music, poetry, prophecy, and the hunt. Their birth story itself illustrated the complexity of divine relationships, as Hera's jealousy forced Leto to wander the earth seeking a place, willing to risk the queen of the gods' wrath by providing sanctuary for her rival's children. Dionysus, born from Zeus's affair with the mortal Semele, represented the most dangerous and transformative aspects of divine power. His domain encompassed wine, ecstasy, and the dissolution of social boundaries that normally separated civilization from chaos. The circumstances of his birth, saved from his mother's womb when she was incinerated by Zeus's true divine form, symbolize the violent creativity that drives both artistic inspiration and social revolution. The establishment of Olympus as the divine capital required Zeus to create new forms of social organization that could accommodate the diverse personalities and spheres of influence represented by the major gods. Unlike the hierarchical simplicity of previous cosmic orders, Olympian society operated more like a complex political system, where different deities held specialized portfolios and competed for influence within an overall framework of Zeus's ultimate authority. This divine government faced its first major challenge when the primordial forces that had been suppressed during the war against the Titans began to reassert themselves in new and dangerous forms. Gaia, despite her role in Zeus's victory, became increasingly dissatisfied with the new cosmic order. Her children, the Titans, had been defeated and imprisoned, while the earth itself was being reshaped by the activities of the new gods without her explicit consent. Her rebellion took the form of producing new children, specifically designed to challenge Zeus's authority. The giants were born from the blood of Uranus that had fallen upon the earth during his castration, making them both products of the original act of cosmic violence and weapons, aimed at correcting what Gaia perceived as the injustices of the current order. These beings possessed strength that rivaled the Titans while lacking the complex motivations that had made some of the older generation amenable to negotiation. The Gigantomachy that followed tested Zeus's new governmental system in ways the Titanomachy had not. The giants couldn't be defeated by the gods alone. Prophecy declared that victory would require the cooperation of a mortal hero. This requirement forced Zeus to acknowledge that the cosmic order he was creating needed to include humanity as active participants, rather than merely passive subjects of divine rule. The involvement of Heracles in the war against the giants established the principle that mortals could achieve heroic status by serving the interests of cosmic order. This wasn't merely a matter of rewarding human courage, but recognition that the stability of the universe required active cooperation between divine authority and human agency. Heroes became intermediaries between the worlds of gods and mortals, capable of accomplishing tasks that required both divine power and human understanding. The victory over the giants didn't end Gaia's opposition to Zeus's rule. Her final challenge came in the form of Typhon, a monster so terrible that even the gods fled in terror when he emerged from the depths of the earth. Typhon embodied everything chaotic and destructive about natural forces, possessing hundreds of snake heads that spoke in the voices of every animal, wings that could create hurricanes, and eyes that blazed with the fire of volcanic eruptions. The battle between Zeus and Typhon represented the ultimate test of whether order could permanently triumph over chaos. Their conflict raged across the Mediterranean, with mountains being torn apart and seas boiling away under the intensity of their struggle. At one point, Typhon actually succeeded in cutting the sinews from Zeus's hands and feet, temporarily paralyzing the king of the gods and demonstrating that even established divine authority remained vulnerable to primordial forces. Zeus's eventual victory over Typhon required not just his own power, but the assistance of other gods, particularly Hermes, who helped restore his severed sinews, and Pan, whose terrifying shout helped drive the monster into retreat. The collaborative nature of this victory reinforced the principle that effective cosmic government required cooperation among diverse divine authorities rather than relying on the strength of a single ruler. The defeat of Typhon marked the end of serious challenges to Zeus's cosmic order from primordial forces. Typhon was imprisoned beneath Mount Etna, where his struggles to escape created the volcanic eruptions that periodically reminded both gods and mortals that chaotic forces remained present but contained within the established order. This containment, rather than destruction of chaos, reflected Zeus's mature understanding that creativity and change required some element of disorder, but that this disorder needed to be channeled and controlled rather than eliminated entirely. With the cosmic order finally stabilized, Zeus could turn his attention to the more complex challenge of governing the relationships between gods and mortals. The human race that existed during this period was not the original Golden Age humanity that had lived under Cronus, but a new creation that reflected the more complex realities of life under Olympian rule. These humans possessed greater knowledge and capability than their predecessors, but they also faced challenges and sufferings that had been unknown during the age of Titan rule. The story of Prometheus became central to understanding the relationship between divine authority and human development. Prometheus, whose name meant forethought, was a Titan who had sided with Zeus during the war and had been rewarded with a role in the new cosmic order. His particular responsibility involved the creation and oversight of humanity, making him something like a divine advocate for mortal interests within the Olympian government. The conflict between Prometheus and Zeus began over what appeared to be a relatively minor issue involving the proper division of sacrificial offerings between gods and humans. When animals were sacrificed, which portions should be reserved for the gods, and which could be consumed by the mortals making the offering? This question might seem trivial, but it actually touched on fundamental issues of divine authority and human autonomy. Prometheus devised a test that revealed Zeus's character while also protecting human interests. He divided a sacrificial bull into 2 portions, wrapping the meat and edible organs in the unappealing stomach lining, while covering the bones and fat with attractive skin. When asked to choose which portion the gods would receive, Zeus selected the superficially appealing package containing only bones and fat, leaving the nutritious meat for humanity. Some versions of this story suggest that Zeus was deceived by Prometheus's trick, but a more psychologically sophisticated interpretation recognizes that Zeus understood exactly what was happening and chose to be deceived in order to establish precedent. By accepting the inferior portion, Zeus demonstrated both his magnanimity toward humanity and his confidence that divine authority didn't depend on hoarding material resources. However, Zeus's response to this deception revealed the complexity of his character and the tensions inherent in divine rule. Angered by Prometheus's presumption in testing him, Zeus withdrew fire from humanity, leaving them cold, vulnerable, and unable to cook their meat or forge metal tools. This punishment was precisely calibrated to demonstrate divine power while acknowledging the legitimacy of human needs. Prometheus's theft of fire to restore it to humanity escalated the conflict to a level that required decisive divine response. Fire wasn't merely a practical tool, but a symbol of knowledge, technology, and the capacity for civilization itself. By stealing fire, Prometheus was asserting that humans had the right to develop their own capabilities, regardless of divine preferences about the proper limits of mortal achievement. Zeus's punishment of Prometheus became one of the most psychologically complex episodes in Greek mythology. Rather than simply destroying the rebellious Titan, Zeus chose a punishment that would serve multiple purposes simultaneously. Prometheus was chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, where an eagle would come each day to eat his liver, which would regenerate each night, creating an eternal cycle of suffering. This punishment operated on several levels of meaning. The daily regeneration of Prometheus's liver ensured that his torment would be eternal, while also symbolizing the endless renewal of his commitment to humanity despite the consequences. The eagle, as Zeus's sacred bird, represented divine authority, feeding off the suffering of those who challenged established order. The location in the Caucasus placed Prometheus at the boundary between Europe and Asia, making him a liminal figure who existed between different worlds. But Zeus's response to human possession of fire involved more than just punishing Prometheus. The creation of Pandora represented a sophisticated attempt to balance the benefits that fire had brought to humanity with consequences that would prevent mortals from becoming too powerful or independent. Pandora wasn't simply a punishment, but a complex gift that embodied both blessing and curse within a single beautiful form. The crafting of Pandora required collaboration among multiple Olympian deities, each contributing specific attributes that would make her irresistible to mortal men, while also ensuring that her presence would introduce new complexities into human life. Hephaestus shaped her body from clay with such skill that she appeared more beautiful than any mortal woman. Athena dressed her in gorgeous clothing and taught her domestic skills that would make her a valuable wife. Aphrodite gave her sexual allure that would inspire passionate love, while Hermes contributed a complex personality that combined charm with cunning and curiosity with recklessness. The famous jar that Pandora brought with her to humanity contained all the evils that would henceforth plague mortal life, from disease and old age to war and famine. But it also contained hope, which remained trapped within the jar when Pandora's curiosity led her to open it, despite explicit warnings not to do so. This detail reveals the sophisticated psychological understanding embedded within Greek mythological thinking. Hope, rather than being purely beneficial, was recognized as potentially dangerous if it prevented humans from accepting the realities of their condition. The release of evils into the human world didn't represent divine cruelty, but acknowledgement that meaningful existence required struggle and challenge. The Golden Age innocence that had characterized humanity under Cronus was incompatible with the knowledge and capabilities that fire had brought. Humans who possessed technology and civilization also needed to develop the psychological resources necessary to cope with the darker aspects of existence. The imprisonment of hope within Pandora's jar suggested that while suffering was now inevitable, the capacity to endure and transcend that suffering remained available, but required deliberate effort to access. Hope wasn't automatically present in human experience, but had to be consciously cultivated and maintained despite evidence that might argue for despair. This mythological framework established the psychological and moral landscape within which all subsequent Greek heroic narratives would unfold. Heroes weren't simply strong individuals who defeated monsters, but mortals who demonstrated the potential for humans to achieve greatness despite the limitations and sufferings that defined mortal existence. Their stories would explore how individuals could navigate the complex relationships between divine authority and human agency, while fulfilling their potential within the cosmic order that Zeus had established. The age of heroes that emerged from this complex divine-mortal relationship represented humanity's coming of age within Zeus's cosmic order. These weren't the simple folk of the Golden Age who lived in harmony with nature, nor were they the sophisticated but morally compromised humans of later periods. The heroes embodied something entirely new in the mythological landscape: mortals who possessed extraordinary capabilities while remaining fundamentally human in their motivations, flaws, and ultimate mortality. The first generation of heroes arose from unions between gods and mortals, creating beings who inherited divine power while retaining human perspective. These demigod children faced unique psychological challenges that pure mortals or pure immortals never encountered. They possessed strength, beauty, and abilities that set them apart from ordinary humans. Yet they remained subject to death, aging, and the emotional complexities that defined mortal experience. This dual nature created internal conflicts that drove some of the most compelling narratives in Greek mythology. Perseus emerged as the archetypal hero whose story established many of the patterns that would define heroic adventure throughout mythological tradition. His birth resulted from Zeus's seduction of Danae, a mortal princess whose father had imprisoned her in a bronze tower to prevent the fulfillment of a prophecy that her son would kill him. Zeus's approach to Danae as a shower of golden light demonstrated his ability to transcend physical barriers, while also symbolizing the transformative power of divine intervention in mortal affairs. The circumstances of Perseus's early life illustrated the precarious position of heroes within both divine and human society. King Acrisius, Danae's father, refused to believe that Zeus was responsible for his daughter's pregnancy and cast both mother and infant into the sea in a wooden chest. This attempted infanticide reflected the fear that mortal rulers felt toward potential divine offspring. Understanding instinctively that such beings posed threats to established human authority structures, Perseus's survival and rescue by fishermen on the island of Seriphos demonstrated the protective power that surrounded legitimate heroes. But his upbringing among humble fisherfolk rather than in royal courts meant that he developed practical skills and a grounded perspective that complemented his divine heritage. This combination of supernatural ability with earthly wisdom became a defining characteristic of successful heroes throughout Greek mythological tradition. The quest to slay Medusa represented Perseus's transition from protected youth to active hero. King Polydectes of Seriphos, who desired to marry Danae against her will, devised the seemingly impossible task of bringing him Medusa's head as a way to eliminate Perseus permanently. Medusa, one of the three Gorgon sisters, had been transformed from a beautiful priestess into a monster whose gaze could turn any living being to stone. Her appearance was so terrifying that direct visual contact meant instant death. The impossibility of this quest forced Perseus to seek divine assistance, demonstrating another crucial aspect of heroic achievement. Heroes weren't expected to succeed through their own efforts alone, but through their ability to earn support from sympathetic deities who recognized their worthiness. Athena provided Perseus with a polished bronze shield that would allow him to view Medusa's reflection without being turned to stone. Hermes contributed winged sandals that would enable flight and a sword capable of cutting through the Gorgon's bronze scales. Most crucially, the nymphs provided Perseus with Hades' helmet of invisibility, allowing him to approach his target unseen. These divine gifts weren't cheating or unfair advantages, but acknowledgements that heroic tasks required capabilities beyond normal human limitations. The hero's worthiness was demonstrated not by rejecting divine help, but by using it wisely and courageously in service of just causes. The actual slaying of Medusa required Perseus to demonstrate multiple forms of excellence simultaneously. Physical courage was necessary to approach such a dangerous opponent, but intellectual cunning was equally important in devising a strategy that would allow him to strike without being turned to stone. The use of Athena's shield as a mirror showed his ability to think creatively under pressure, while his successful decapitation of Medusa while she slept demonstrated both tactical awareness and precise execution. The consequences of Medusa's death revealed the interconnected nature of mythological events. From her severed neck sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a golden giant. These births symbolized how destruction of one form of power often led to the emergence of new forces that would reshape the mythological landscape. Pegasus would become associated with poetic inspiration and the connection between earthly and celestial realms, while Chrysaor would father monsters that future heroes would need to confront. Perseus's journey home with Medusa's head provided opportunities for additional heroic acts that demonstrated his developing moral character. His rescue of Andromeda, who had been chained to a rock as sacrifice to a sea monster, showed his willingness to risk his own safety to protect innocent victims of divine wrath. Andromeda's predicament resulted from her mother Cassiopeia's boast that her daughter was more beautiful than the sea nymphs, causing Poseidon to send the monster as punishment for this hubris. The psychological complexity of this rescue episode revealed sophisticated understanding of heroic motivation. Perseus could have simply continued his journey home, avoiding the dangerous confrontation with the sea monster. His choice to intervene demonstrated that true heroism involved accepting responsibility for protecting others, even when such protection required personal sacrifice. The subsequent marriage between Perseus and Andromeda created a partnership that would produce a line of heroic descendants, showing how individual heroic acts could have generational consequences. The ultimate confrontation between Perseus and his grandfather Acrisius fulfilled the original prophecy while demonstrating the inescapable nature of fate in Greek mythological thinking. Despite Acrisius's attempts to prevent his own death by casting Perseus into the sea as an infant, the old king was accidentally killed by a discus thrown by Perseus during athletic games. This accidental fulfillment of prophecy illustrated the Greek understanding that fate operated through natural consequences of actions rather than arbitrary divine intervention. Perseus's establishment of the city of Mycenae and his founding of a royal dynasty showed how heroic achievements could create lasting contributions to human civilization. His descendants would include some of the most famous heroes in Greek mythology, including Heracles, demonstrating how heroic excellence could be transmitted across generations while taking different forms, appropriate to changing circumstances. The story of Bellerophon provided another model of heroic achievement, while also exploring the psychological dangers that could corrupt heroic excellence. Bellerophon's adventures began when he was falsely accused of attempting to seduce Antaea, the wife of King Proetus of Tiryns. Rather than executing Bellerophon directly, which would violate the sacred laws of hospitality, Proetus sent him to Antaea's father, King Iobates of Lycia, with a sealed letter requesting that the bearer be put to death. This seemingly treacherous plan actually created the circumstances that would allow Bellerophon to achieve his greatest heroic triumph. Iobates, also bound by hospitality laws, could not simply execute his guest, but instead assigned him the supposedly impossible task of killing the Chimera, a fire-breathing monster with the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and the tail of a serpent. This creature had been terrorizing the Lycian countryside, making normal life impossible for the local population. Bellerophon's success against the Chimera required him to master Pegasus, the winged horse that had sprung from Medusa's blood. This partnership between hero and magical mount represented a new form of heroic achievement that combined human courage and skill with supernatural capabilities. The taming of Pegasus required not just physical prowess, but spiritual harmony between mortal and divine elements. The aerial battle between Bellerophon and the Chimera showcased innovative, heroic tactics that transcended traditional ground-based combat. Flying above the monster on Pegasus, Bellerophon could avoid the Chimera's flames while attacking from advantageous positions. His victory involved shooting arrows tipped with lead into the creature's throat, where the metal would melt from the monster's internal fire and block its breathing passages. But Bellerophon's subsequent adventures revealed the psychological pitfalls that could trap successful heroes. After completing additional impossible tasks assigned by the increasingly amazed King Iobates, Bellerophon began to believe that his achievements made him worthy of joining the gods on Mount Olympus. His attempt to ride Pegasus to the divine realm represented the dangerous pride that Greeks called hubris, the arrogant assumption that mortal accomplishments could elevate humans to divine status. Zeus's response to this presumption was swift and devastating. He sent a gadfly to sting Pegasus, causing the horse to buck and throw Bellerophon back to earth. The hero's fall left him crippled and blind, wandering as a beggar for the rest of his life. This harsh punishment demonstrated that heroic excellence, while admirable and necessary, could become destructive when it led heroes to forget their essential mortality and proper place within the cosmic order. The contrast between Perseus's humble acceptance of his achievements and Bellerophon's prideful overreach illustrated crucial lessons about the proper relationship between heroic excellence and divine authority. Heroes could accomplish extraordinary things and receive recognition for their achievements, but they needed to maintain appropriate humility regarding their ultimate dependence on divine favor and their essential mortality. The emergence of Heracles represented the culmination of heroic potential within the constraints of the Zeus-ordered cosmos. As the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene, Heracles possessed divine strength while remaining subject to human emotions and limitations. His life story encompassed virtually every type of heroic challenge while exploring the psychological complexities that arose when supernatural power was combined with mortal consciousness. Heracles' birth was marked by Hera's jealous rage at Zeus's latest infidelity. The queen of the gods delayed the hero's birth while accelerating that of his cousin Eurystheus, ensuring that the weaker child would be born first and thus inherit the kingship that had been prophetically promised to Zeus's son. This manipulation demonstrated how divine conflicts could have profound consequences for mortal lives, while also establishing the framework of obligation that would drive Heracles' greatest adventures. Hera's persecution of Heracles began in his infancy when she sent serpents to kill him in his cradle. The infant's ability to strangle the snakes with his bare hands provided early evidence of his supernatural strength, while also symbolizing his capacity to overcome the deadly obstacles that would characterize his entire life. This incident established the pattern of Hera's hostility, serving paradoxically to create opportunities for Heracles to demonstrate his heroic excellence. The psychological complexity of Heracles' character emerged through his struggles with uncontrollable rage that could transform his protective instincts into destructive fury. The most tragic manifestation of this internal conflict occurred when Hera sent madness upon him, causing him to kill his wife Megara and their children in a fit of divinely induced insanity. This catastrophe forced Heracles to confront the darkest aspects of his own nature while seeking redemption through heroic service. The oracle at Delphi directed the grief-stricken hero to serve his cousin Eurystheus for 12 years, performing whatever labors the cowardly king might devise. This arrangement served multiple purposes within the mythological framework. It provided Heracles with a path toward redemption, while also ensuring that his extraordinary capabilities would be directed toward tasks that benefited humanity rather than potentially threatening established order. The 12 labors that Eurystheus assigned to Heracles encompassed virtually every type of challenge that heroes might face, while also serving practical purposes that benefited human civilization. The killing of the Nemean lion, whose hide was impervious to weapons, required Heracles to develop new strategies and demonstrated that even supernatural strength needed to be combined with intelligence to achieve success against the most dangerous opponents. The destruction of the Linnaean Hydra introduced the concept of problems that seem to multiply when confronted directly. Each time Heracles cut off one of the monster's heads, two would grow back in its place, making traditional approaches to combat counterproductive. The solution required teamwork with his nephew Iolaus, who cauterized the neck stumps to prevent regeneration, showing that some challenges required collaborative effort rather than individual heroism. The capture of the Ceryneian hind tested Heracles' patience and tracking skills rather than his strength, requiring him to pursue the sacred deer of Artemis for an entire year before finally capturing it unharmed. This labor demonstrated that heroic excellence needed to encompass restraint and respect for divine property, not just overwhelming force applied to destructive ends. The cleaning of the Augean stables in a single day forced Heracles to think creatively about seemingly impossible tasks. Rather than attempting to manually remove decades of accumulated filth, he diverted two rivers to flow through the stables, accomplishing through engineering what could never have been achieved through labor alone. This solution illustrated the heroic principle that intelligence and innovation were as valuable as physical prowess. The slaying of the Stymphalian birds required Heracles to overcome opponents who could attack from aerial positions where his strength provided no advantage. Using bronze castanets provided by Athena to startle the birds into flight, then shooting them with arrows, he demonstrated adaptability and willingness to accept divine assistance when facing unfamiliar challenges. The capture of the Cretan bull involved subduing a creature that Poseidon had sent to terrorize Crete, showing how heroic labors often involved cleaning up the consequences of divine conflicts that had harmed mortal populations. Heracles' success in capturing and transporting the bull alive demonstrated his ability to control his own strength while accomplishing tasks that required precision rather than destruction. The theft of the mares of Diomedes presented psychological as well as physical challenges, as these horses had been trained to eat human flesh and had become savage beyond normal animal behavior. Heracles' solution involved feeding their owner Diomedes to his own horses, then leading the now calm animals away. This labor explored themes of justice and appropriate punishment, while showing how some problems required extreme solutions. The acquisition of Hippolyta's belt required Heracles to interact with the Amazon queen, a warrior woman whose strength and skill rivaled his own. The initial peaceful negotiations that might have succeeded were disrupted by Hera's manipulation, forcing a battle that resulted in Hippolyta's death and the successful completion of the labor through violence rather than diplomacy. This tragic outcome illustrated how divine interference could corrupt heroic intentions. The theft of Geryon's cattle took Heracles to the far western edge of the known world, where he had to overcome a three-bodied giant and his two-headed dog, Orthrus. The journey required him to cross the ocean on a golden cup borrowed from Helios, the sun god, demonstrating how the greatest heroic achievements required cooperation from cosmic forces beyond normal divine assistance. The retrieval of the golden apples of the Hesperides forced Heracles to seek help from Atlas, the Titan who held up the heavens. The complex negotiations involved Heracles temporarily taking on Atlas's cosmic burden while the Titan retrieved the apples, then tricking Atlas into resuming his eternal task. This labor explored themes of cosmic responsibility and the prices that must be paid to maintain universal order. The final labor, bringing Cerberus from the underworld, required Heracles to journey to the realm of the dead and convince Hades to allow him to borrow the three-headed guard dog. This ultimate test of heroic courage involved confronting mortality itself while demonstrating respect for the boundaries between life and death. Hades agreed to the loan on condition that Heracles subdue Cerberus without using weapons, forcing the hero to rely purely on his strength and determination. The successful completion of the 12 labors established Heracles as the greatest of all heroes, while also demonstrating the potential for mortals to achieve excellence that complemented rather than challenged divine authority. His subsequent adventures, including his participation in the Argonautic expedition and various rescue missions, showed how heroic excellence could continue to serve beneficial purposes throughout a lifetime of extraordinary achievement. But Heracles' story also explored the ultimate limitations that defined even the greatest heroic achievements. His death came not through defeat in battle, but through the treachery of his wife Deianira, who unknowingly poisoned him with a shirt soaked in the Hydra's blood. The agony caused by this poison was so intense that Heracles chose to end his suffering by constructing a funeral pyre and burning himself alive. Zeus's response to his son's death revealed the potential for heroic excellence to transcend mortality through divine recognition. Rather than allowing Heracles to descend to Hades like other mortals, Zeus brought him to Mount Olympus and granted him immortality, making him the only mortal hero to achieve full divine status. This apotheosis represented the ultimate reward for a lifetime of service that had consistently placed the welfare of others above personal comfort or safety. The transformation of Heracles from tormented mortal to immortal god demonstrated that the cosmic order Zeus had established allowed for genuine transcendence of human limitations through extraordinary achievement, guided by proper humility and service to just causes. His elevation to Olympus didn't represent escape from the human condition, but rather the fulfillment of human potential within the divine framework that governed all existence. The heroic age that Heracles embodied reached its culmination in the great collective enterprises that brought together multiple heroes for challenges that exceeded what any individual could accomplish alone. The voyage of the Argonauts and the Trojan War represented the two greatest examples of collaborative heroic effort, each exploring different aspects of what could be achieved when extraordinary individuals worked together toward common goals, while also revealing the conflicts and complications that arose when heroic egos collided with the demands of group cooperation. The quest for the Golden Fleece began not with heroic ambition, but with political manipulation and family betrayal that would become all too familiar in the mythological landscape. Jason's claim to the throne of Iolcus had been usurped by his uncle Peleus, who ruled through fear and cunning rather than legitimate authority. When the young hero appeared at court wearing only one sandal, having lost the other while helping an old woman cross a river, Peleus recognized the fulfillment of a prophecy warning him to beware a one-shod man. Rather than openly murdering his nephew, which would have violated sacred customs and potentially provoked divine retribution, Peleus devised what appeared to be an honorable solution to his succession problem. He would send Jason on a quest so dangerous that failure seemed inevitable, yet glorious enough that acceptance would demonstrate heroic worthiness. The Golden Fleece hanging in distant Colchis, guarded by a sleepless dragon in a grove sacred to Ares, represented exactly the kind of impossible challenge that would eliminate an inconvenient rival while maintaining the appearance of fair treatment. Jason's response revealed both his heroic nature and his understanding of political realities. He could have challenged Peleus directly, risking civil war that would devastate the kingdom, regardless of who emerged victorious. Instead, he accepted the quest while recognizing that success would require resources and companions beyond what any individual hero could provide. His decision to gather the greatest heroes of his generation demonstrated sophisticated strategic thinking that elevated collective achievement above personal glory. The assembly of the Argonauts represented something unprecedented in heroic tradition. Previous heroes had operated largely as individuals, accepting divine assistance, but maintaining primary responsibility for their own achievements. Jason's expedition required coordination among dozens of extraordinary personalities, each possessing specialized skills and divine connections that would prove essential for different aspects of the journey. The ship Argo itself, built with Athena's guidance and incorporating a speaking beam from Zeus's sacred oak at Dodona, symbolized the fusion of human craftsmanship with divine wisdom that characterized this new form of heroic enterprise. The crew included heroes whose individual exploits had already established their legendary status. Heracles brought his unmatched strength and experience from the 12 Labors, though his presence created immediate complications regarding leadership and group dynamics. Orpheus contributed musical abilities that could charm wild beasts, calm storms, and provide psychological support during moments of despair. The twins, Castor and Pollux, offered expertise in horsemanship and boxing, while their divine heritage ensured favorable treatment from Zeus during critical moments. Theseus, already famous for his conquest of the Minotaur and his role in establishing Athenian democracy, represented the political sophistication that would be necessary for negotiating with foreign rulers. Peleus, future father of Achilles, brought tactical military knowledge, while Telamon's strength and loyalty would prove crucial during combat situations. The inclusion of women like Atalanta, despite initial resistance from some crew members, acknowledged that heroic excellence transcended gender boundaries and that the quest's success might require capabilities traditionally associated with feminine wisdom. The journey to Colchis tested every aspect of heroic capability while revealing the psychological complexities that arose when strong-willed individuals were forced to cooperate under pressure. The first major challenge came at Lemnos, where the Argonauts discovered an island populated entirely by women who had killed all their men for taking Thracian concubines. Queen Hypsipyle's explanation of their situation presented the heroes with moral dilemmas that had no clear resolution. The Lemnian women's actions could be interpreted as justified response to masculine infidelity and abandonment, but their wholesale slaughter of the male population exceeded any reasonable standard of proportional justice. The Argonauts' decision to remain on the island for an extended period, enjoying the women's hospitality and forming romantic attachments, revealed how heroic purposes could be compromised by personal desires and the comfort of temporary pleasure over the demands of difficult duty. Only Heracles' growing impatience with the delay forced the expedition to continue, demonstrating how individual heroes with strong moral compasses could serve as conscience for group endeavors that might otherwise lose focus. His intervention established the principle that collective heroic enterprises required internal mechanisms for maintaining dedication to their ultimate purposes, even when attractive alternatives presented themselves. The loss of Heracles himself during the next phase of the journey created the expedition's first major crisis of leadership and purpose. When his beloved companion Hylas was abducted by water nymphs while drawing water from a spring, Heracles' frantic search for the youth led to his separation from the main group. The Argonauts' decision to continue without him, despite his enormous contribution to their capabilities, forced Jason to assume full leadership responsibility, while also demonstrating that even the greatest individual heroes could be vulnerable to personal attachments that conflicted with larger obligations. This incident revealed fundamental tensions between heroic excellence as individual achievement and heroic service as collaborative effort directed toward common goals. Heracles' devotion to Hylas represented the intensely personal loyalty that characterized traditional heroic relationships. But his abandonment of the quest for private emotional reasons conflicted with his obligations to the group and their shared mission. The expedition's continuation without him established that collective enterprises had their own moral imperatives that might require difficult choices about individual versus group priorities. The encounter with the blind prophet Phineus provided the Argonauts with crucial information about navigating the Symplegades, the clashing rocks that guarded the entrance to the Black Sea, while also demonstrating how heroic service could involve protecting those who possessed valuable knowledge but lacked the power to defend themselves. Phineus had been blinded by Zeus and tormented by Harpies, who stole his food as punishment for revealing too much divine information to mortals, creating a situation where his wisdom was available but his ability to act on it was severely constrained. The sons of the North Wind, Zeus and Calais, used their ability to fly to drive away the Harpies, freeing Phineus from his torment in exchange for guidance through the dangerous passage ahead. This transaction illustrated how heroic capabilities could be used to restore justice for those who had suffered from divine punishment, while also advancing the hero's own objectives through mutually beneficial cooperation. The passage through the Symplegades required the Argonauts to demonstrate perfect timing and coordination under extreme pressure. The clashing rocks crushed anything that attempted to pass between them, making the strait appear completely impassable to normal navigation. Phineus's advice to release a dove first, observing how quickly the rocks closed after it passed through, provided the timing information necessary for the Argo to follow immediately behind and squeeze through the narrowing gap. The successful navigation of this obstacle required every crew member to perform their specialized function flawlessly, while trusting their companions to do likewise. The rowers had to achieve perfect synchronization, the steersman needed to maintain precise course control, and those responsible for the sail had to adjust it with split-second timing to maximize speed through the passage. The loss of only the ship's stern ornament as the rocks closed behind them represented the narrowest possible margin of success, demonstrating how collective heroic achievements often depended on coordination that left no room for individual error or hesitation. The arrival in Colchis presented Jason with challenges that couldn't be resolved through strength or traditional heroic tactics. King Aeetes possessed the Golden Fleece, but had no intention of surrendering it to foreign adventurers, regardless of their heroic credentials or the justice of their cause. His agreement to provide the fleece if Jason could complete certain tasks represented a calculated attempt to eliminate the threat while maintaining the appearance of honorable behavior. The tasks themselves were designed to be impossible for any mortal hero to accomplish. Jason would need to yoke fire-breathing bronze bulls, plow a field with them, sow dragons' teeth in the furrows, and then defeat the armed warriors who would spring from the planted teeth. Each element of this challenge exceeded normal human capabilities while requiring skills that Jason had never developed. The fire-breathing bulls demanded resistance to supernatural heat. The ploughing required experience with agricultural techniques, and the combat against earthborn warriors would involve tactical situations unlike any previous heroic encounter. The intervention of Medea, Aeetes' daughter, and a powerful sorceress transformed Jason's impossible situation into a manageable challenge while also introducing psychological and moral complications that would have far-reaching consequences. Medea's decision to help Jason stemmed from Aphrodite's manipulation of her emotions, creating a passionate love that overrode her loyalty to her father and her people. This divine intervention in mortal affairs demonstrated how the gods continued to influence heroic achievements while also raising questions about the authenticity of emotions and choices that resulted from supernatural manipulation. Medea's magical assistance provided Jason with protective ointments that would shield him from the bull's flames, tactical advice for defeating the earthborn warriors, and ultimately a potion that would put the guardian dragon to sleep long enough for him to steal the fleece. But this aid came at the cost of Medea's betrayal of her own family and kingdom, creating moral complexities that traditional heroic narratives had rarely explored in such depth. The successful completion of Aeetes' tasks demonstrated Jason's ability to accept help when it was offered while maintaining the courage necessary to face supernatural dangers, even with magical protection. His strategy for defeating the earthborn warriors, throwing a stone into their midst to make them fight each other, rather than engaging them directly, showed tactical intelligence that complemented the magical assistance he had received. The combination of divine favor, supernatural aid, and human courage that characterized his success became a model for understanding how heroic achievement typically required multiple forms of support working in harmony. The theft of the Golden Fleece itself required Jason to enter the sacred grove of Ares alone, confronting the sleepless dragon that had guarded the treasure since time immemorial. Even with Medea's potion, this task demanded enormous personal courage, as the dragon's size and ferocity made it capable of killing him instantly if the magical sleep failed to take effect. His successful retrieval of the fleece represented the culmination of the quest's primary objective, but it also marked the beginning of consequences that would pursue him for the rest of his life. The escape from Colchis revealed the darker implications of heroic success achieved through morally questionable means. Medea's murder of her young brother, Absyrtus, cutting his body into pieces and scattering them to delay their father's pursuit, demonstrated how the pursuit of heroic goals could lead to actions that violated the most fundamental moral boundaries. Her calculation that Aeetes would have to stop and gather the pieces for proper burial bought the Argonauts time to escape, but it also made Jason complicit in a crime that no heroic achievement could justify. This incident forced the expedition members to confront the ethical dimensions of their quest in ways that previous heroic narratives had largely avoided. They had achieved their objective and could return home as successful heroes, but their success depended on the assistance of someone whose methods included kinslaying and desecration of the dead. The moral contamination that resulted from accepting such aid raised fundamental questions about whether heroic ends could justify any means, or whether some prices were too high to pay even for the greatest achievements. The journey home subjected the Argonauts to additional trials that tested not only their heroic capabilities, but also their ability to maintain group cohesion, despite the moral tensions that Medea's presence had introduced. The detour through the Western Mediterranean, driven by Zeus's anger at Absyrtus's murder, forced them to seek purification from Circe, Medea's aunt, who possessed the authority to cleanse them of blood guilt, while also understanding the full implications of what they had done. Circe's reluctant purification of Jason and Medea provided ritual cleansing from the pollution of murder, but it couldn't eliminate the psychological and moral consequences that would continue to influence their relationship. Her warning that such crimes inevitably produced additional suffering proved prophetic, as the pattern of betrayal and violence that had characterized their escape from Colchis would continue to shape their lives long after the quest's completion. The encounter with the sirens during the return journey provided Orpheus with an opportunity to demonstrate how his musical abilities could counter supernatural threats that might have destroyed heroes who relied purely on physical prowess. The siren song, which lured sailors to their deaths on rocky shores, represented a form of danger that couldn't be defeated through strength or courage, but required artistic excellence that could compete with divine enchantment on its own terms. Orpheus's performance, which drowned out the siren's deadly melody with music of even greater beauty and power, illustrated how heroic capabilities encompass not just martial prowess, but also cultural achievements that could protect and inspire human civilization. His success saved the expedition while also demonstrating that the arts possessed their own form of heroic potential, capable of accomplishing what weapons and physical strength could never achieve. The final challenge of the return journey came when the Argonauts found their path blocked by Talos, the bronze giant who guarded Crete by hurling massive boulders at any ship that approached the island. This automaton, created by Hephaestus and given to King Minos, possessed strength that dwarfed even Heracles while being invulnerable to conventional weapons. The seemingly impossible task of defeating or bypassing this guardian required the expedition to draw upon all their accumulated wisdom and experience. Medea's solution involved using her knowledge of the giant's construction to identify his single vulnerable point, the bronze nail that sealed the vein carrying ichor through his body. Her ability to remove this nail through a combination of magic and psychological manipulation caused Talos to bleed to death, clearing the path for the Argonauts' return. This final victory demonstrated how heroic success often depended on understanding the hidden weaknesses of apparently invincible opponents rather than attempting to overcome superior force through direct confrontation. The triumphant return to Iolcus should have marked the successful conclusion of Jason's heroic career, but the presentation of the Golden Fleece to Pelias revealed that political problems rarely had purely heroic solutions. The treacherous king had no intention of honoring his agreement to abdicate in favor of his nephew. Understanding that Jason's success had actually strengthened his own position by eliminating potential rivals who might have supported the legitimate heir's claim. Medea's response to this betrayal involved tricking Peleus's daughters into killing their father by convincing them that they could restore his youth through a magical process that actually required them to cut him into pieces and boil him in a cauldron. This gruesome murder achieved Jason's political objectives, while also demonstrating how the methods that had enabled their heroic success continued to corrupt their relationships and moral standing. The psychological trajectory of Jason's story revealed how heroic achievement could become self-defeating when it depended on compromises that undermined the very values that heroic excellence was supposed to embody. His marriage to Medea had provided him with the supernatural assistance necessary to complete his quest, but it had also bound him to someone whose approach to problem-solving involved systematic violation of moral boundaries that civilized society required for its survival. The eventual breakdown of Jason's marriage to Medea, culminating in her murder of their children when he attempted to abandon her for a more politically advantageous union, represented the ultimate consequence of heroic success achieved through morally compromised means. The children's deaths served no strategic purpose and provided no benefit to anyone involved, illustrating how the cycle of violence and betrayal that had characterized the quest's success inevitably consumed even innocent victims who had no role in creating the original conflicts. Jason's final years, spent as a broken wanderer haunted by the consequences of his choices, provided a cautionary counterpoint to the more straightforward heroic narratives that characterized earlier mythological traditions. His story demonstrated that heroic capability without moral wisdom could lead to achievements that were ultimately self-destructive, destroying the very relationships and values that gave heroic success its meaning and purpose. The Argonautic expedition's legacy extended far beyond Jason's personal tragedy to influence how subsequent generations understood the possibilities and limitations of collective heroic enterprise. The successful cooperation among diverse heroic personalities had demonstrated that challenges exceeding individual capabilities could be overcome through coordinated group effort, while the moral complications that arose during the quest revealed the ethical complexities that inevitably accompanied such ambitious undertakings. The expedition's impact on the heroes who survived it varied considerably depending on their individual characters and their roles in the morally questionable aspects of the quest's success. Those who had maintained their ethical integrity throughout the journey, like Orpheus and the Dioscuri, continued their heroic careers with enhanced reputations and valuable experience in collaborative leadership. Others, who had been more deeply involved in the controversial decisions that enabled their success, found their subsequent achievements overshadowed by the moral compromises they had accepted. The story of the Argonauts established important precedents for understanding how heroic excellence could be applied to challenges that required extended cooperation among strong-willed individuals with competing priorities and perspectives. The expedition's successes demonstrated the potential for achieving goals that exceeded what any individual could accomplish alone, while its failures revealed the psychological and moral pitfalls that could trap even the most capable heroes when they allowed expedient solutions to override ethical principles. This complex legacy provided crucial background for understanding the even more ambitious collective heroic enterprise that would define the culmination of the heroic age, the Trojan War. The lessons learned from the Argonautic expedition about leadership, cooperation, moral decision-making, and the long-term consequences of choices made under pressure would prove essential for comprehending how the greatest heroes of Greek mythology would ultimately destroy themselves and their civilization through their inability to balance individual excellence with collective responsibility and ethical wisdom. The seeds of Troy's destruction were planted not in the heroic ambitions of mortals, but in the vanity and competitive jealousy of the goddesses themselves. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis, attended by all the gods except Eris, the personification of discord, created the perfect opportunity for divine mischief that would ultimately consume a generation of heroes. Eris's exclusion from the celebration wasn't mere oversight, but deliberate rejection of the chaotic forces she represented. Yet this very rejection provided her with the motivation and justification for the revenge that would reshape the ancient world. The golden apple that Eris hurled into the wedding feast bore an inscription that would ignite the most devastating conflict in mythological history. To the fairest seemed like innocent flattery, but when three of the most powerful goddesses each claimed the prize, the simple fruit became a catalyst for cosmic disaster. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each possessed legitimate claims to supreme beauty, yet their willingness to compete revealed the fundamental insecurity that lurked beneath divine perfection. The psychological complexity of this divine beauty contest exposed the sophisticated understanding of feminine competition that characterized Greek mythological thinking. These weren't petty squabbles over superficial appearance, but profound conflicts over the essential nature of divine feminine power. Hera represented the authority of marriage and legitimate rule. Athena embodied wisdom and strategic warfare, while Aphrodite personified the irresistible force of sexual attraction and passionate love. Each goddess understood that recognition as the fairest would validate her particular sphere of influence, while diminishing her rivals' claims to cosmic importance. Zeus's refusal to judge the contest demonstrated remarkable political wisdom combined with equally remarkable cowardice. As king of the gods, he possessed the authority to render final judgment, but he also understood that choosing any one goddess would create permanent enemies among the other two. His decision to delegate the judgment to a mortal revealed both his cunning and his willingness to sacrifice human welfare to avoid divine conflict. The selection of Paris, a Trojan prince living as a shepherd on Mount Ida, appeared to offer a neutral arbitrator who lacked the political connections that might bias his decision. But Paris's pastoral isolation hadn't prepared him for the psychological pressure that each goddess would bring to bear on his judgment. The contest quickly evolved beyond simple evaluation of physical beauty into a sophisticated auction where each divine participant offered increasingly extravagant bribes designed to influence the outcome. The prizes they proposed revealed not only their individual natures, but also their understanding of masculine desire and ambition. Hera's offer of supreme political power appealed to the traditional masculine aspiration for dominance and control. She promised Paris rulership over all of Asia, positioning him as the greatest king in the known world, with authority that would eclipse even his father Priam's substantial power. This bribe revealed Hera's understanding that many men valued status and command above all other considerations, while also demonstrating her willingness to reshape geopolitical reality to secure personal victory. Athena's promise of invincibility in battle targeted different masculine fantasies involving heroic achievement and military glory. She offered Paris the tactical brilliance and strategic wisdom that would make him the greatest warrior of his generation, capable of defeating any opponent and winning victories that would be remembered throughout history. Her proposal acknowledged that martial excellence represented another fundamental pathway to masculine fulfillment, though one that required different capabilities than pure political dominance. Aphrodite's bribe proved most psychologically sophisticated and ultimately most persuasive, because it addressed desires that the other goddesses had overlooked or underestimated. Rather than offering abstract power or glory, she promised Paris the love of Helen, described as the most beautiful mortal woman ever born. This proposal recognized that sexual and romantic fulfillment could motivate human behavior more powerfully than political ambition or martial achievement, particularly for young men who had not yet experienced the complications that accompanied both power and warfare. The psychological brilliance of Aphrodite's offer lay in its specificity and immediate appeal. Political power and military invincibility remained abstract concepts that Paris could imagine but not directly experience, while the promise of possessing the most beautiful woman in the world sparked immediate desire that overwhelmed rational consideration of consequences. The goddess's ability to make Helen's beauty vivid in Paris's imagination through divine manipulation of his perceptions ensured that her bribe would eclipse the more practical benefits offered by her rivals. Paris's choice of Aphrodite established the fundamental pattern of prioritizing immediate gratification over long-term consequences that would characterize many of his subsequent decisions. His award of the golden apple to the goddess of love represented more than simple aesthetic judgment. It constituted a philosophical statement about the relative importance of passion versus wisdom, desire versus duty, and personal fulfillment versus political responsibility. This decision would ultimately destroy his city, his family, and himself, yet the mythological framework presented it as psychologically inevitable given the nature of divine manipulation and human weakness. The immediate consequences of Paris's judgment manifested in the permanent hostility that Hera and Athena would harbor toward Troy throughout the subsequent conflict. These goddesses' wounded pride transformed them into implacable enemies of Trojan civilization, ensuring that divine favor would consistently support Greek forces during the war that followed. Their support for the eventual Greek victory wasn't merely political calculation, but personal revenge against the city, whose prince had rejected their claims to supreme beauty. Meanwhile, Aphrodite's obligation to fulfill her promise required her to engineer circumstances that would bring Helen and Paris together, despite the considerable obstacles that separated them. Helen's marriage to Menelaus, king of Sparta, represented a significant barrier to Aphrodite's plans, as did the geographical distance between Troy and Greece and the diplomatic complications that would arise from any attempt to seduce another ruler's wife. The goddess's solution demonstrated both her creative problem-solving abilities and her complete disregard for the collateral damage that her schemes would inevitably produce. The diplomatic mission that brought Paris to Sparta provided Aphrodite with the opportunity she needed to fulfill her commitment while maintaining plausible deniability regarding her role in subsequent events. Paris's official purpose involved negotiating trade agreements and cultural exchanges between Troy and various Greek kingdoms, creating legitimate reasons for him to visit royal courts throughout the region. His arrival in Sparta coincided with Menelaus's departure for Crete to attend funeral ceremonies for his grandfather, leaving Helen temporarily without her husband's protection and supervision. Aphrodite's manipulation of both Helen and Paris during their initial encounter involved supernatural enhancement of their natural attraction that made resistance psychologically impossible. The goddess didn't create artificial emotions, but rather amplified existing desires to levels that overwhelmed rational judgment and moral restraint. Helen's immediate fascination with the handsome Trojan prince and Paris's obsessive desire for the beautiful Spartan queen resulted from divine intervention, yet they remained sufficiently grounded in genuine attraction to feel authentic to both participants. The seduction itself unfolded through stages that revealed the sophisticated understanding of human psychology that characterized divine manipulation throughout Greek mythology. Aphrodite began by ensuring that Helen and Paris spent increasing amounts of time together, creating opportunities for intimate conversation and emotional bonding that established genuine affection alongside physical attraction. The goddess's subtle influence encouraged them to share personal thoughts and feelings that created psychological intimacy, making their eventual physical union seem like the natural culmination of deep emotional connection rather than mere lust. The actual consummation of their affair occurred during a religious festival honoring Aphrodite herself, creating symbolic appropriateness while also providing practical cover for their secret meetings. The irony of their adultery taking place during ceremonies dedicated to the goddess who had orchestrated their meeting demonstrated the complex relationship between divine will and human moral responsibility that pervaded Greek mythological thinking. Their actions violated sacred laws governing marriage and hospitality, yet they were simultaneously fulfilling divine intentions that transcended human ethical frameworks. Helen's decision to abandon her husband, daughter, and kingdom to flee with Paris represented one of the most psychologically complex choices in all of mythology. Her motivations encompassed genuine love for Paris, dissatisfaction with her marriage to Menelaus, divine compulsion that made resistance impossible, and perhaps most significantly, unconscious recognition that her extraordinary beauty had always made her more of a possession than a person in the eyes of those around her. Her flight to Troy constituted both betrayal and liberation, destroying her previous life while offering the possibility of relationship based on mutual desire rather than political arrangement. The couple's escape from Sparta required careful planning and divine assistance to succeed, despite the enormous risks involved. Paris's ships had to be prepared for immediate departure, treasure had to be gathered to support their new life in Troy, and routes had to be chosen that would minimize the chances of interception by Menelaus's allies. Aphrodite's intervention ensured favorable winds and calm seas during their journey, while also blinding potential observers to their passage until they had gained sufficient lead to make pursuit futile. The arrival of Helen and Paris in Troy created immediate complications for King Priam and the Trojan royal family. The couple's obvious happiness and genuine affection for each other made it impossible to dismiss their relationship as mere political calculation or temporary infatuation. Yet their union had been achieved through means that violated fundamental principles of international law and diplomatic courtesy. Priam faced an impossible choice between supporting his son's happiness and avoiding the catastrophic war that Helen's presence would inevitably provoke. The king's decision to welcome Helen into the royal family and refuse all demands for her return demonstrated both paternal loyalty and political miscalculation of extraordinary magnitude. Priam understood that harboring Menelaus's wife would provoke Greek retaliation, but he underestimated both the scale of the response and the determination of the coalition that would form to retrieve her. His calculation that Troy's wealth, military strength, and strategic alliances would deter or defeat any Greek expedition proved tragically incorrect. The Greek response to Helen's abduction revealed the complex web of obligations and ambitions that connected the various kingdoms throughout the region. Menelaus's call for assistance in retrieving his wife activated oath-bound commitments that many Greek rulers had made years earlier when competing for Helen's hand in marriage. The clever Odysseus had suggested that all suitors swear to defend whoever won Helen's hand against any who might threaten their marriage, creating legal obligations that transformed a personal grievance into a collective Greek cause. Agamemnon's assumption of leadership over the Greek expedition reflected both his legitimate authority as Menelaus's brother and his personal ambitions for expanded power and influence. The High King of Mycenae possessed the resources necessary to organize and supply a massive military undertaking, but his motivations extended far beyond fraternal loyalty to encompass dreams of conquest, plunder, and the elimination of Troy as a commercial rival. His ability to present the expedition as a righteous cause defending the sanctity of marriage masked more pragmatic considerations involving trade routes, territorial expansion, and the demonstration of Greek military superiority. The assembly of the Greek fleet at Aulis represented the largest military mobilization in mythological history, bringing together heroes, kings, and warriors from throughout the Greek world for a common enterprise that promised either glorious victory or catastrophic defeat. The expedition's roster included virtually every significant hero of the generation, from the cunning Odysseus and the mighty Ajax to the young Achilles, whose participation had been prophesied as essential for Greek success, despite his knowledge that involvement in the war would mean his own death. The supernatural obstacles that delayed the fleet's departure from Aulis revealed the continued influence of divine politics on mortal affairs. Artemis's demand for the sacrifice of Iphigenia, Agamemnon's eldest daughter, as compensation for his boastful claim to be a better hunter than the goddess herself, forced the expedition's leader to choose between his paternal love and his military ambitions. His decision to proceed with the sacrifice demonstrated the psychological corruption that absolute power could produce, while also illustrating how divine requirements could force mortals into actions that violated their deepest moral convictions. The deception involved in bringing Iphigenia to Aulis under the pretense that she was to marry Achilles added layers of betrayal and manipulation that prefigured the moral complexities that would characterize the entire war. Clytemnestra's discovery of her husband's true intentions created a rift in their marriage that would ultimately lead to Agamemnon's assassination upon his return from Troy, demonstrating how the war's moral compromises would continue to generate consequences long after its military conclusion. The sacrifice itself, whether it involved Iphigenia's actual death or her rescue by Artemis and substitution of a deer at the last moment, established precedents for the kind of extreme measures that the war would require from all participants. The Greeks' willingness to proceed with their expedition after witnessing or participating in child sacrifice revealed the psychological transformation that the quest for Helen had already produced in their leadership, while Artemis's acceptance of the offering ensured divine support for their enterprise. The 10-year siege that followed the Greeks' arrival at Troy tested every aspect of heroic capability, while revealing the psychological and moral deterioration that extended warfare produced in even the most noble participants. The initial expectations of quick victory through superior Greek military prowess proved utterly incorrect, as the Trojans' defensive advantages and their own heroic champions created strategic stalemate that could only be resolved through attrition, cunning, or divine intervention. The conflict's duration allowed for the full development of individual heroic personalities and relationships under the extreme stress of prolonged combat. Achilles emerged as the most formidable warrior of either side, possessing supernatural strength and speed that made him virtually invincible in single combat, yet his psychological volatility and concern for personal honor created constant friction with Agamemnon's authority and strategic priorities. The tension between individual heroic excellence and collective military discipline that had characterized earlier mythological conflicts reached its most intense expression in the relationship between these two powerful personalities. Hector's role as Troy's primary defender established him as the moral and tactical counterpoint to Achilles' devastating effectiveness. The Trojan prince's commitment to protecting his city, family, and people provided clear motivation for his heroic efforts, while his tactical brilliance and personal courage made him the only warrior capable of matching Achilles in combat effectiveness. His psychological complexity, encompassing genuine love for his wife Andromache and infant son Astyanax, alongside his duty as Troy's military leader, created internal conflicts that humanized his heroic stature, while also highlighting the personal costs that warfare imposed on all participants. The famous duel between Hector and Achilles represented the culmination of individual heroic combat within the larger framework of collective military enterprise. Their confrontation had been building throughout the war as the two greatest warriors gradually eliminated lesser opponents and established their reputations as the ultimate champions of their respective sides. When Achilles finally killed Hector in revenge for the death of his beloved companion Patroclus, the psychological and strategic balance of the entire conflict shifted decisively toward Greek victory. The desecration of Hector's body through Achilles' decision to drag it behind his chariot around the walls of Troy revealed how the war's brutality had corrupted even the greatest heroes' sense of honor and appropriate behavior toward fallen enemies. This act of savage revenge exceeded all traditional boundaries governing warfare between civilized peoples, demonstrating how prolonged conflict could reduce noble warriors to bestial behavior that dishonored both themselves and their victims. Priam's nighttime journey to Achilles' tent to ransom his son's body created one of the most psychologically complex scenes in all of literature, bringing together the grieving father and the warrior who had killed his son in circumstances that demanded both enormous courage and unprecedented humility. The old king's willingness to humble himself before his son's killer, while Achilles' eventual agreement to return Hector's body for proper burial, demonstrated that human decency could survive even the most dehumanizing circumstances, though such moments of grace remained rare exceptions to the general brutalization that characterized the conflict. The war's conclusion required not heroic combat, but cunning strategy that exploited Trojans' psychological weaknesses rather than attempting to overcome their military strengths. Odysseus's conception of the Trojan horse represented a fundamental shift away from the direct confrontation that had characterized earlier phases of the conflict toward deception and infiltration that acknowledged the impossibility of achieving victory through conventional siege tactics. The construction of the massive wooden horse required craftsmanship that rivaled divine creation, while also demanding strategic thinking that could anticipate and manipulate Trojan responses to its appearance. The selection of the warriors who would hide within the horse's hollow interior involved careful consideration of both combat effectiveness and psychological stability, as the success of the entire stratagem depended on their ability to remain silent and motionless for extended periods while surrounded by enemies. The Greeks feigned departure from Troy, leaving only the horse and the lying spy Sinon to convince the Trojans that the wooden construction was a religious offering, rather than a military weapon, demonstrated sophisticated understanding of enemy psychology and the power of religious sentiment to override rational caution. Sinon's fabricated story about the horse being too large to fit through Troy's gates, thereby preventing the Trojans from gaining divine protection by bringing it into their city, cleverly reversed the actual situation to make the Trojans eager to accomplish exactly what the Greeks wanted them to do. The destruction of Troy that followed the horse's entry into the city represented warfare at its most savage and complete, with Greek forces showing no mercy to men, women, or children as they sought revenge for 10 years of frustration and loss. The systematic slaughter of the Trojan royal family, including the murder of infant Astyanax to prevent future revenge, demonstrated how the war had brutalized its participants to the point where they could no longer distinguish between military necessity and pure savagery. The division of Trojan women as slaves among the Greek victors, including Helen's return to Menelaus and Cassandra's assignment to Agamemnon, created new sources of conflict that would continue to generate violence long after Troy's fall. These enslaved women carried with them both the trauma of witnessing their family's destruction and the burning desire for revenge that would influence their behavior in their captors' households. The Greek heroes' returns to their homelands revealed that victory in war, even total victory, couldn't restore the innocence and stability that had existed before the conflict began. The men who returned had been fundamentally changed by their experiences, while the societies they had left behind had also evolved during their absence in ways that made reintegration difficult or impossible. Agamemnon's assassination by Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus upon his return to Mycenae demonstrated how the war's moral compromises continued to generate consequences in peacetime. The queen's revenge for Iphigenia's sacrifice created a cycle of family violence that would ultimately consume the next generation as well, while Agamemnon's death eliminated the political authority that had held the Greek coalition together during the war. Odysseus's extended journey home, marked by supernatural obstacles and divine persecution, revealed how the war's aftermath could be as dangerous and challenging as the conflict itself. His 10-year odyssey through a world populated by monsters, sorceresses, and hostile gods tested different aspects of heroic capability than combat had required, emphasizing intelligence, endurance, and adaptability over pure martial prowess. The transformation of the heroic age's survivors into the founders of new dynasties and the establishers of new political orders demonstrated how mythological narratives understood historical change as resulting from the exhaustion of one form of human excellence and its replacement by different capabilities more suited to changing circumstances. The age of individual heroes gave way to more complex forms of social organization that emphasized collective governance over personal charisma and legal institutions over heroic judgment. The Trojan War's conclusion marked not just the end of a particular conflict, but the transformation of the entire heroic tradition from stories of individual achievement to narratives exploring the costs and consequences of human ambition. The mythological framework that had celebrated heroic excellence increasingly focused on the psychological and moral complexities that accompanied great achievement, preparing the intellectual ground for the philosophical and dramatic innovations that would characterize classical Greek culture. The legacy of Troy's destruction continued to influence Greek thinking about war, politics, and human nature throughout the classical period, providing reference points for understanding how individual choices could have collective consequences and how the pursuit of honor and glory could ultimately destroy the very values it claimed to defend. The mythological exploration of these themes established conceptual frameworks that would inform Western literature, philosophy, and political theory for millennia to come, ensuring that the stories born from ancient Greek imagination would continue to illuminate fundamental aspects of human experience, regardless of changing historical circumstances. The psychological sophistication and moral complexity that characterized these mythological narratives revealed the advanced intellectual development that ancient Greek civilization had achieved through its systematic exploration of human nature, divine authority, and the relationships between individual excellence and collective welfare. The myths provided not just entertainment but comprehensive frameworks for understanding the forces that shaped both personal development and social evolution, creating cultural resources that could guide practical decision-making while also satisfying deeper human needs for meaning, purpose, and connection to transcendent values. The collapse of the heroic age left a profound vacuum in the Greek understanding of human potential and divine relationship. As the great individual champions who had defined an entire era lay dead or scattered across the Mediterranean, new forms of excellence emerged to fill the void they had created. The transition from heroic individualism to collective wisdom marked one of the most significant transformations in mythological thinking, as communities that had once relied on extraordinary individuals to solve their problems were forced to develop more sustainable approaches to governance, conflict resolution, and moral guidance. The emergence of the mystery religions represented one crucial response to this heroic vacuum. These secretive cults promised initiates direct access to divine knowledge and spiritual transformation that had previously been available only to heroes through their supernatural adventures and divine parentage. The Eleusinian mysteries, centered on the story of Demeter and Persephone, offered participants the possibility of transcending mortality through ritual participation in cosmic cycles of death and rebirth that paralleled the seasonal transformations governing agricultural life. The psychological appeal of mystery initiation lay in its promise to democratize the kind of transformative experiences that had once been reserved for heroic figures like Orpheus, who had journeyed to the underworld and returned with knowledge of divine realities. Ordinary individuals could now undergo symbolic death and resurrection within carefully controlled ritual environments, gaining access to wisdom about the nature of existence that equipped them to face their own mortality with greater courage and understanding. The Dionysiac mysteries explored different aspects of transcendence through ecstatic experience that dissolved the boundaries between individual consciousness and cosmic unity. These rites involved wine consumption, frenzied dancing, and sexual liberation that temporarily freed participants from the constraints of ordinary social identity, while connecting them to primordial forces of creativity and destruction. The psychological release provided by Dionysiac worship served essential functions in communities that had lost the vicarious excitement and meaning that heroic adventures had once provided. But the mystery religions also revealed the dangers inherent in attempts to replace heroic excellence with purely spiritual solutions to human problems. The exclusive nature of initiation created new forms of social hierarchy based on esoteric knowledge rather than demonstrated achievement, while the emphasis on transcending ordinary reality could lead to withdrawal from practical responsibilities that communities required for their survival and prosperity. So there you have it, the complete tapestry of Greek mythology, from the primordial chaos that preceded existence itself to the twilight of heroes and the emergence of new forms of human understanding. We've journeyed through cosmic wars between generations of gods, witnessed the rise and fall of legendary heroes, and explored the psychological depths that made these ancient stories so enduringly powerful. These weren't just tales told for entertainment, but sophisticated explorations of power, justice, love, mortality, and the eternal human struggle to find meaning within forces far greater than ourselves. The Greeks created something unprecedented, a mythological universe so rich and complex that it continues to shape how we understand ourselves and our place in the cosmos thousands of years later.